I went into the North Cascades for a daily job, but what I found in that alpine bowl changed my life forever. I didn't just see a Bigfoot, I saw a family, a sacred ritual, and a culture so profound it terrified me. I'm going to tell you the true story of how I captured the world's first undeniable proof of the Sasquatch. Before we hike into the Forbidden Zone, drop a comment below and let me know where you're watching from today. And if you want to help me protect the secrets of the unseen wild, make sure to hit that subscribe button. I've spent 20 years lying in the mud, waiting for animals that don't want to be seen. I'm not a tourist with an iPhone, I'm a specialist in elusive apex predators. My portfolio is filled with snow leopards in the Himalayas and jaguars in the Pantanal, captured on long lens glass after weeks of silence. But in October of 2018, I took a contract in the North Cascades of Washington State, looking for a specific, scarred mountain lion the locals called the Ghost. I hiked 15 miles past the last service road, carrying 80 pounds of gear, intending to stay until the snow flew. I wanted the perfect shot of the Ghost. I found something else entirely. The location was a high-altitude bowl, a natural amphitheater of granite and old-growth hemlock that funneled the wind into a constant, low moan. I set up my hide, a camouflaged blind, downwind of a game trail that showed heavy pug marks. For 3 days, nothing happened. That's the job. 99% boredom, 1% adrenaline. I drank lukewarm coffee and watched the light change on the bark, my breathing slow and shallow. I became a statue. I became part of the scenery. But on the fourth afternoon, the silence of the woods changed. It didn't just get quiet, it got heavy. Usually when a predator arrives, the forest reacts with alarm, squirrels chatter, jays scream. This was different. The forest simply held its breath. The birds stopped mid-song. The wind seemed to die. It was a vacuum of sound that pressed against my eardrums. Then I heard it. It wasn't the snap of a twig or the crunch of leaves. It was a rhythmic, dull thudding. Thump, thump, thump. It was the cadence of a bipedal walk, but the weight behind it was wrong. It sounded like a pile driver hitting the earth with soft leather. I checked my watch. 4:45 p.m. The light was failing, turning the woods into a landscape of blue shadows and gray shapes. I scanned the tree line with my binoculars, expecting to see a bear standing on its hind legs, or maybe a lost hiker. But the rhythm was too steady for a bear and too heavy for a human. It was purposeful. I slowly reached for my primary camera, a Canon with a 600mm prime lens, mounting it on the gimbal head. My hands were steady, but the hair on the back of my neck was standing straight up. My reptilian brain was screaming that I was no longer the hunter. I saw the movement out of the corner of my eye, a disruption in the pattern of the trees. It wasn't a shape I could define, it was a shadow that detached itself from a cedar trunk and drifted to the next one. It moved with a fluidity that was impossible for its size. It didn't bob up and down like a human. It glided, the knees bent, the torso still. I tracked it with the lens, but the autofocus hunted, unable to lock onto the dark fur against the dark bark. It was nature's perfect camouflage. I switched to my backup tech. I had brought a high-end thermal monocular, military-grade gear intended for tracking the cougar at night. I pulled it from my vest and pressed it to my eye. The world turned into a grayscale image of heat signatures. The trees were cool gray, the rocks were black. And there, standing 80 yards away in a thicket of salal, was a white-hot beacon of biological energy. It wasn't a mountain lion. It was upright. It had broad shoulders, a thick neck, and it was standing on 2 legs. I froze, the monocular trembling slightly against my brow. The heat signature was massive, easily 7.5 feet tall. It wasn't wearing a coat. The heat was radiating uniformly from its entire body, consistent with fur or hair. A human in clothes has cold spots, zippers, boots, thick jackets. This thing was a solid furnace of metabolism. It was standing perfectly still, one arm resting on a tree branch above its head, a posture so casually human yet so physically impossible that my brain stuttered. Then a second heat signature appeared. It stepped out from behind the first one. This one was smaller, maybe 5 feet tall, a juvenile. It moved differently with more chaotic energy, reaching out to grab the larger one's arm. The large one, the parent, looked down. I saw the heat profile of the head turn. There was no snout. The face was flat. The connection between them was immediate and tender. The large one placed a hand on the small one's head, a gesture of reassurance that I had seen 1,000 human fathers do. I realized I wasn't looking at a monster. I was looking at a family. The ghost mountain lion I had been tracking must have smelled them miles ago and fled the county. These were the apex of the apex. I reached for the record button on the thermal scope. My thumb hovered over it. I knew that pressing that button would change my life. It would change science. It would change the world. I took a breath. steadied my hand against the blind, and pressed record. The large figure suddenly whipped its head toward my position. Even through the thermal, I felt the impact of that gaze. I was 80 yards away, buried in camouflage, scent-blocked and silent. Yet, he knew. He looked directly at the lens of the thermal scope. He didn't roar. He didn't charge. He simply stared, his heat signature burning a hole in the digital display. He was assessing the threat. He was calculating the distance. The juvenile tried to step forward, but the large male extended an arm, barring the way. It was a protective barrier. The woods were absolutely silent. I was capturing the first clear, high-resolution thermal footage of a Sasquatch family unit in history, and all I could think about was the intelligence in that stare. He wasn't just an animal reacting to a noise, he was a sentry guarding his kin. And then slowly he began to make a sound, not a growl, but a low, vibrating hum that I could feel in the floor of the blind. For the next 4 days, I lived in a state of hyper-focused obsession. I didn't sleep. I barely ate. I stayed in the blind using drone surveillance and high-end telephoto lenses to monitor the family from a distance that felt safe, but was probably illusory. The large male, the patriarch, had established a perimeter, but he seemed to accept my presence as long as I didn't cross the creek line. It was a silent truce. He knew I was watching, and I knew he was tolerating me. The ritual began at dusk on the 5th day. It wasn't a sudden event. It was a slow gathering. From the deep timber, other figures emerged, 3 adults and 2 more juveniles. They moved with a silence that defied their mass. They formed a semicircle in a small clearing near a massive ancient cedar stump that had been hollowed out by fire decades ago. It looked like a natural altar. The patriarch stood in the center, facing the stump, his back to me. I watched through my 600mm lens, the image stabilized by the heavy tripod. The light was fading, but the thermal scope cut through the gloom. The heat signatures were distinct. The adults were calm, standing with their hands at their sides or resting on each other's shoulders. The juveniles were subdued, watching the adults with wide eyes. This wasn't a feeding frenzy or a territorial display. It was a ceremony. It had structure. It had reverence. The patriarch reached into a pouch, not a woven bag, but a natural depression in a large piece of bark he carried, and pulled out something small. He held it up to the sky, or perhaps to the trees. Through the lens, I saw it was a stone, smooth and round. He placed it carefully on the flat top of the cedar stump. Then, one by one, the other adults approached. Each carried a similar object, a stone, a twisted branch, a pine cone. They placed them on the stump with deliberate care. If you've ever felt like there's more to nature than just survival, if you believe that the wild places hold ancient secrets of connection, subscribe to this channel. I'm not just showing you monsters, I'm showing you a culture. Help me protect the sanctity of the unknown. Now back to the ceremony. The vocalization started as a low hum, similar to what I had heard on the first day, but this time it was multi-tonal. The adults were harmonizing. It wasn't music in the human sense, but it was a complex, layered sound that resonated with the frequency of the forest. It sounded like the wind in the trees, but amplified and structured. The juveniles joined in with higher-pitched chirps and clicks. It was a choir of the woods, a song of belonging. They began to move in a slow, circular dance around the stump. It wasn't frantic. It was a rhythmic swaying, a shifting of weight from one foot to the other. They kept their hands on the back of the individual in front of them, creating a continuous chain of contact. The physical touch seemed crucial. It was a reinforcement of the social bond, a way of saying, "We are one unit. We are safe." I realized I was witnessing something profound. This wasn't just animal behavior, this was culture. They were honoring something, perhaps the ancestors, perhaps the forest itself. The cedar stump was clearly significant. Was it a grave marker, a historical site, a boundary marker? The specific placement of the object suggested a ritualistic offering. They were giving back to the land that sustained them. The juveniles were included in the circle, but they were guided gently by the adults. If one broke rhythm or tried to play, an adult would place a hand on its shoulder, calming it instantly. It was education. They were teaching the next generation the importance of the ritual. The transmission of knowledge is a hallmark of higher intelligence. They weren't born knowing this. They were learning it. As the moon rose, casting a silver light over the clearing, the patriarch stepped away from the circle and walked to the edge of the creek. He knelt down and cupped his hands in the water. He didn't drink. He washed his face, scrubbing the fur on his cheeks and forehead. Then he returned to the circle and did the same for each member of the clan. He was cleansing them. It was a baptism of sorts, a purification rite. The intimacy of the act was staggering. To see a creature that could rip a deer in half gently wash the face of a child was a cognitive dissonance that left me breathless. It shattered every stereotype of the violent monster. These were beings capable of profound tenderness. They had empathy, they had tradition, they had a spiritual life that we had been too arrogant to imagine. I kept the camera rolling, filling memory card after memory card. I knew that every frame was rewriting the history of biology. I had captured behavior that no scientist had ever predicted. I had proof of a complex society living in the shadows of our world. But as I watched them fade back into the deep timber, the silence returning to the valley, a heavy knot of dread began to form in my stomach. I had the footage. Now, what the hell was I going to do with it? I sat in the dark of my small tent, the only light coming from the glow of my laptop screen. I had transferred the files from the SD cards, a process that felt agonizingly slow, like downloading the secrets of the universe over a dial-up connection. When the first video file opened, I stopped breathing. It wasn't the blurry, shaking Zapruder-style footage the world was used to. It was 4K, high dynamic range video shot on a $10,000 lens. The patriarch's face filled the frame. I could see the moisture in his eyes. I could see the individual gray hairs in his beard. I could see a small scar above his lip. It was undeniably terrifyingly real. I zoomed in until the pixels began to break, looking for a seam, a zipper, a mask line, anything to tell me this was a man in a suit. There was nothing. The anatomy was perfect. The trapezius muscles flowed into the neck in a way that human physiology simply doesn't support. The brow ridge was bone, not rubber. I could see the skin slide over it when he chewed. The biomechanics of his gait, captured at 60 frames per second, showed a mid-tarsal break in the foot that no human possesses. This wasn't a costume. This was biology. I put on my noise-canceling headphones and opened the audio files. The waveform was a complex, jagged mountain range of data. I isolated the vocalizations from the wind and the creek. What I heard made the hair on my arm stand up. It wasn't just grunts, it was a language. There were syntax, tonal shifts, and repeated phonemes. The song during the ritual had a mathematical structure to it. I ran a preliminary frequency analysis. The lower registers dropped below the range of human hearing into infrasound, the fear frequency that tigers use to paralyze prey. The magnitude of what sat on my hard drive began to sink in. This was the scientific equivalent of splitting the atom. It was the biological holy grail. This data would rewrite every textbook on anthropology, zoology, and human evolution. It proved that we are not the only bipedal, intelligent hominids on the planet. The missing link wasn't missing. It was hiding in Washington State, washing its children's faces in a creek. I held the answer to the biggest question of the modern age in my hand. I looked at the metadata. GPS coordinates precise to within 3 meters. Date, time, barometric pressure, temperature. It was a forensic lock. There was no way to debunk this. The sheer volume of data, terabytes of video, thousands of still images, hours of audio, created a tapestry of proof that would withstand the scrutiny of the harshest skeptics. I wasn't just a witness anymore. I was the curator of a new reality. I had the power to vindicate every crazy person who had ever been laughed at for seeing something in the woods. I imagined the press conference. I saw myself standing at a podium in New York or London, the National Geographic logo behind me, the flashing cameras, the hush as I played the clip of the baptism, the cover of Time, Science, Nature. The fame would be instantaneous and absolute. I would go from being a rugged freelancer living paycheck to being the most famous photographer in history. The financial value of the footage alone was in the millions. It was a winning lottery ticket, stamped with the seal of history. But as I scrolled through the images, identifying the individuals, the euphoria began to curdle into something heavier. I named them: the patriarch, the matriarch, the scarred juvenile I called split ear. They weren't just specimens, they were a family. I knew their routine. I knew how the mother groomed the youngest. I knew the specific way the patriarch scanned the tree line before he sat down. By naming them, I had humanized them, and by humanizing them, I had complicated the discovery. I'm sharing this because the weight of this secret nearly broke me. If you think you would have called the news stations immediately, hit subscribe and tell me in the comments. I thought I would too, but looking into their eyes on a 4K monitor changes everything. Let's talk about the burden of proof. The scientific implications were staggering, but the practical ones were terrifying. If I released this, the ghost mountain lion I came to photograph would be the least of this valley's worries. This specific GPS coordinate would become the center of the world. Every university, every government agency, every trophy hunter, and every Bigfoot enthusiast with a rifle would descend on this bowl. The silence of the North Cascades would be shattered by helicopters and drones. I looked at the map on my screen, the little blue dot pulsing at the location of the ritual site. It felt like a target. I had discovered them, but in doing so, I had also painted a bullseye on their backs. The proof was undeniable, But proof is a weapon. It destroys mystery. It demands verification. Verification means capture. Capture means dissection, or at best, a cage. I looked at the patriarch's face again, frozen in a pixelated stare. He looked like a king. I closed the laptop, plunging the tent back into darkness. The silence of the woods outside felt different now. It wasn't empty. It was fragile. I had the power to change the world, but I was beginning to realize that the price of that change might be paid in blood. Theirs. The hard drive felt heavy in my backpack, like a chunk of uranium. I had the bomb. The question was no longer if Bigfoot existed, but what would happen to him now that we knew. The initial rush of discovery began to fade, replaced by a cold, creeping nausea. I sat there staring at the satellite phone in my hand, the little green signal light blinking in the darkness of the tent. It was the detonator. One call to my editor in DC, and the machinery of the modern world would start grinding toward this valley. I imagined the headlines. I imagined the breaking news alerts, but then I imagined the sound of a Chinook helicopter thumping over the ridgeline, drowning out the sacred silence of the ritual I had just witnessed. The discovery wasn't a gift. It was an invasion fleet waiting for a signal. I thought about the prime directive in science fiction, the rule that advanced civilizations must not interfere with developing ones. I realized with a jolt that we were the aliens in this scenario. We were the technologically advanced, resource-hungry, dangerous species encountering a primitive, isolated culture. And history has a very clear, very bloody track record of what happens when we discover new people. We don't protect them. We study them, we infect them, and we displace them. I wasn't an explorer, I was the tip of the spear. If you believe that some things in this world are too pure to be touched by modern hands, if you think that discovery is often just a polite word for conquest, subscribe to the channel. Help me wrestle with the question, does science have the right to know everything, even if the knowing destroys the subject? Let's debate this. The scientific community would demand a specimen. That's the hard truth of biology. A video is great, but a body is proof. If I release these coordinates, there would be a race to secure a holotype, a dead Sasquatch to put on a slab and dissect. I looked at the face of the patriarch on my screen, his eyes closed in the moonlight during the baptism. I imagined him on a metal table, cut open, his organs weighed in jars. The thought made me physically ill. I hadn't found a monster to slay. I had found a father protecting his children, but it wasn't just the scientists I feared, it was the enthusiasts. The internet is filled with people who have made Bigfoot hunting their identity. Some are harmless, but many are armed. If the location leaked, and it always leaks, this bowl would become a hunting ground. Weekend warriors with AR-15s and thermal scopes would flood the logging roads, shooting at anything that moved. The ghost mountain lion would be collateral damage. The deer would be slaughtered. The fragile ecosystem of the alpine bowl would be trampled into mud by thousands of boots looking for a footprint. I considered the pathogens. These creatures had been isolated for God knows how long. They likely had no immunity to human diseases. A discarded tissue, a cough from a researcher, a contaminated water source, we could wipe them out with the common cold or the flu before we even learned their language. By trying to study them, we would be bringing a biological weapon into their living room. The contact itself was a contamination event. I wrestled with my own ego. This was my ticket to immortality. The man who found Bigfoot. My name would be in the history books alongside Darwin and Goodall. I had spent my whole life in the shadows, scraping by, waiting for my big break. Now it was here, sitting on a hard drive in my lap. Was I strong enough to walk away from that? Was I noble enough to burn the winning lottery ticket? The selfish part of my brain was screaming, "Post it, call them, claim your prize." I looked at the footage of the juvenile, split ear, playing with a pine cone. He was innocent. He had no idea that a hairless ape with a glass eye was deciding his fate from a nylon tent a mile away. He was living in a world of magic and survival, a world that was complete without us. Who was I to end that? Who gave me the right to turn his home into a zoo or a laboratory? The arrogance of discovery is the belief that a thing doesn't truly exist until we have named it. But they existed just fine without my taxonomy. The King Kong scenario played out in my mind. If they were cornered, they would fight. I had seen the power in the patriarch's shoulders. He could flip a car. If the authorities came and the family felt threatened, there would be violence. And when a monster fights back, we bring the military. I saw the flashbangs, the tranquilizer darts, the nets. I saw the patriarch dying in a hail of bullets trying to defend the matriarch. I would be the architect of that massacre. I thought about the conservation argument. If we prove they exist, we can protect the habitat. That's the standard line, but protection brings bureaucracy, tourism, and management. You can't manage a species like this. They aren't elk. They are a people. They are a tribe. And the only protection that has ever worked for them is their invisibility. Their myth is their shield. By shattering the myth, I would be stripping them of their only armor against the Anthropocene. I picked up the satellite phone again. My thumb hovered over the call button. The number for the National Geographic field desk was already highlighted. One press. That was all it would take to change history. The signal light blinked. Green, green, green. It was the eye of the world waiting to look into the valley. I looked at the dark forest outside, listening to the wind in the hemlocks, knowing that once I made this call, that wind would never sound the same again. I imagined the silence of the valley filled with the roar of generators and the shouting of men. I realized that the truth wasn't worth the silence. The silence was the truth. I looked at the hard drive, glowing with the blue light of the data transfer. It contained the proof of the century, and I knew with a sudden crushing clarity that the only way to save the proof was to make sure no one else ever saw it. I sat there in the flickering light of the tent, my finger hovering over the send button on the upload, but then I looked at the patriarch's face on the screen one last time. He wasn't looking at a camera. He was looking at me. He was trusting me to be the better species. I realized that uploading this file wouldn't be a scientific breakthrough. It would be an act of betrayal. I was about to sell a family into captivity for a byline in a magazine. I slowly moved my mouse to the raw GPS metadata file. I didn't just close it, I corrupted it. I scrambled the coordinates until they pointed to the middle of the Pacific Ocean. Then began the most painful editing session of my life. I took the pristine 4K footage, the evidence that would have made me rich, and I destroyed it. I applied heavy Gaussian blurs to their faces. I distorted the audio frequencies, pitching the complex language down until it sounded like generic animal noises. I turned the sharp, irrefutable proof into the kind of grainy, ambiguous blob-squatch footage that skeptics laugh at. I was actively sabotaging my own masterpiece. I was turning a discovery into a campfire story. If you understand that some secrets are worth more than fame, if you believe that protecting the innocent is the highest calling of a witness, subscribe to this channel. I destroyed my career to save a family. Help me build a community that understands why. Now, the final step. The next morning I packed up my camp. I dismantled the blind, erased my footprints, and scattered pine needles over the matted grass where my tent had been. I wanted to leave zero trace that a human had ever been there. As I hoisted my pack, I looked up at the ridgeline one last time. I didn't see them, they were too good for that, but I felt them. The heavy silence of the woods was back, but it wasn't threatening anymore. It felt like a nod, a quiet acknowledgement that the intruder was leaving and taking the danger with him. I hiked the 15 miles back to the truck in a daze. Re-entering civilization was a shock. The noise of the highway, the gas station lights, the people staring at their phones, it all felt trivial. I carried a hard drive in my pocket that contained the biological soul of the planet, and no one knew. I drove home, the weight of the secret settling into my bones. I wasn't just a photographer anymore. I was a keeper. I had joined a very small fraternity of people who know the truth and choose to swallow it. When I finally released the story, the altered clips, the vague anecdotes, the reaction was exactly what I expected. The internet tore it apart. Fake, they said. Guy in a suit. CGI. Why is it always blurry? I read the comments and smiled. Every insult, every debunking video was a victory. As long as the world thought I was a fraud, the family in the North Cascades was safe. I wore the ridicule like a badge of honor. I let my reputation burn to create a smokescreen for the patriarch. I'm sharing this now because the world is getting smaller. Drones are everywhere. Satellites see everything. If we don't start valuing unseen conservation, we will lose the magic before we even understand it. Subscribe if you stand for the wild. Help me keep the mystery alive. I kept one copy of the raw, unaltered footage. It sits on an air-gapped hard drive in a safety deposit box that will only be opened 50 years after my death. By then, maybe we will be wise enough to handle the truth. Maybe we will have learned that we don't have to own everything we see. Until then, it stays dark. It is my burden and my treasure. I visit it sometimes just to remind myself that magic is real and that for 1 week in October, I was part of it. I have become an advocate for a new kind of environmentalism. We usually protect land so we can hike on it, camp on it, and photograph it. I argue for unseen conservation, protecting vast tracts of land specifically to keep people out. We need to leave blank spots on the map. We need to accept that there are places where human feet shouldn't tread, where the prime directive is the law of the land. We need to save the woods not for us, but for them. The ghost mountain lion I went looking for is probably still out there, or maybe he's gone. It doesn't matter. What matters is that the valley remains a fortress. Every time I see a new Bigfoot hunter show on TV with their thermal drones and their screaming researchers, I feel a pang of anxiety. But then I remember the patriarch's eyes. I remember the intelligence, the caution, the silence. They have survived ice ages, volcanoes, and colonization. They are the masters of the hide-and-seek game. I am done with the chase. I don't look for them anymore. When I go into the woods now, I make noise. I wear bright colors. I stick to the trail. I respect the boundary. I know that somewhere, in a deep, green bowl of cedar and rain, a father is washing his child's face in a creek, safe in the knowledge that the hairless ape kept his promise. So, look at the blurry image on your screen. Laugh at it if you want. Call it a hoax. But in the quiet of the night, ask yourself, why is the forest so quiet? Why do you feel watched? The truth isn't in the pixels, my friend. The silence I bought with my corrupted hard drive lasted exactly 14 months. I had settled into a quiet life, shooting weddings and real estate, content in the knowledge that the ghost family was safe in their anonymity. The fake footage I released had been dismissed by the major forums as another hoax, just as I planned. I slept well, believing I had successfully closed the door on the valley, but I underestimated the obsessive power of the internet. The hive mind doesn't sleep, and it doesn't forgive mistakes. It started with an email from a user named Geospatial Analyst. The subject line was just coordinates. My heart hammered against my ribs as I opened it. They weren't the fake coordinates I had planted in the Pacific. They were the real ones, or close enough to matter. They pointed to the trailhead 5 miles south of the bowl. The message body was terrifyingly short. I ran a horizon line analysis on the 3 seconds of background you forgot to blur in the fake clip. The ridge profile matches the North Cascades, specifically the jagged peak of Mount Shuksan. I know where you were. I stared at the screen, the blood draining from my face. I had spent hours blurring faces and distorting audio, but I had missed a jagged silhouette of rock in the top left corner of one frame. It was a breadcrumb the size of a pixel, but for a forensic geologist with time on his hands, it was a roadmap. The user wasn't asking if I was there, he was telling me he was going. He attached a Google Earth overlay, matching my video frame to the satellite terrain. It was a perfect fit. If you think privacy is dead in the digital age, if you worry that nothing can stay hidden anymore, subscribe to the channel. I thought I was clever, but an algorithm outsmarted me. Help me figure out how to protect the wild from the cloud. Now, back to the email. I replied instantly, trying to play it cool. Good eye, I wrote. But that was just B-roll I shot on a hiking trip years ago. The creature footage was CGI, overlaid on that background. It was a desperate lie. He replied within minutes. CGI doesn't generate heat displacement in the air around a subject. I ran a thermal filter on your fake video. The heat signature is consistent with a biological entity of that mass. You found them, and I'm going to find them too. My expedition leaves in 3 weeks. Panic set in. This wasn't a troll. This was a funded researcher. If he went up there with a team, he wouldn't just sit in a blind. He would grid search the valley. He would bring drones with FLIR cameras. He would find the cedar stump. He would find the prints. He would shatter the sanctuary I had sacrificed my career to protect. I realized then that deleting the data wasn't enough. I had to actively intervene. I couldn't stop him from going, but maybe I could control where he looked. I made a decision that felt like another betrayal. I emailed him back. You're right, I was there, but you're looking in the wrong drainage. If you go to the coordinates you sent, you'll find nothing but shale. I can show you where the real activity is, but I have to come with you. I was offering myself as a guide. In reality, I was offering myself as a decoy. I intended to lead his expedition into the empty valleys to the east, away from the family, wasting his time until the snows came and closed the pass. We hiked into the east drainage, a desolate rocky scar of a valley that I knew was empty of everything but marmots and wind. I pushed the pace, driving the team hard, hoping to exhaust them before they could set up their sensory grid. Geo, the lead researcher, was fitter than I expected. He carried a customized pack loaded with acoustic traps and thermal arrays, his eyes scanning the ridgeline with a hunger that made my stomach turn. Every time he stopped to check his GPS, I felt a spike of adrenaline. I had to keep convincing him that the anomaly was just over the next rise, dragging him further away from the sacred bowl where the patriarch was likely sleeping. We made camp at 5,000 feet on a shale shelf that offered zero cover. It was a tactical choice. I wanted them exposed and miserable. As the sun set, they deployed their gear with military efficiency. Parabolic microphones were aimed at the tree line. Motion-activated cameras were strapped to the few stunted larches. It was a surveillance net tight enough to catch a mouse. I set up my own tent on the perimeter, acting the part of the brooding guide, but secretly, I was engaging my countermeasures. I had modified a high-frequency dog whistle to emit a random ultrasonic pulse every 10 minutes, enough to ruin their audio recordings with unexplainable interference. If you believe that some boundaries shouldn't be crossed, If you think that science doesn't give us the right to invade every sanctuary on Earth, subscribe to this channel. I risked federal prison to sabotage this mission. Help me keep the wild places wild. Now watch what happens when the tech fails. The first night was a masterclass in frustration. The team sat around the monitors, headphones on, expecting to hear the complex language I had described. Instead, they got static. My jammer was working. "The noise floor is too high," the audio tech complained, ripping his headset off. "It's like something is bleeding into the spectrum." I sat by the fire, sipping coffee, feigning ignorance. "Maybe it's the granite," I suggested. "Piezoelectric effect from the tectonic stress." It was pseudo-scientific nonsense, but they were desperate for an explanation that wasn't equipment failure. The next morning, Geo decided to launch the heavy lift drone. This was the threat I feared most. It carried a FLIR camera capable of spotting a heat signature from 3 miles out. If he flew it high enough, he would see over the ridge into the real sanctuary. I watched him calibrate the rotors, his face illuminated by the controller screen. I waited until the drone was hovering at 200 feet. Then I stumbled near the operator, spilling my metal canteen directly onto the external antenna array. It wasn't subtle, but it was effective. The video feed cut out instantly. The drone, confused by the sudden signal loss, went into auto-return mode, but without the GPS lock, it drifted. It crashed into the canopy of a distant fir tree with a sickening crunch of carbon fiber. "My God!" Geo screamed, turning on me. "Watch where you're walking." I apologized profusely, playing the clumsy, tired old man. "The scree is loose," I muttered, wiping up the water. Inside, I was cheering. That was $50,000 of surveillance tech that wouldn't be spying on the family today. But the victory was short-lived. By the third night, the atmosphere in the camp had shifted from excitement to suspicion. Geo was looking at his maps more frequently, measuring the angles of the sun against the ridgeline. He was realizing that the topography didn't match the background of my fake video. He was smart. I could see the gears turning. He knew I was stalling. "We're in the wrong drainage," he said quietly over dinner. "The wind patterns are wrong. The vegetation is too sparse." I tried to argue, but he cut me off. "Tomorrow we cross the ridge. We go west." That night, the sabotage backfired. I was lying awake, plotting how to disable the truck when I heard it. It wasn't on the monitors. It was in the air. A low, rhythmic whoop echoed from the darkness of the real sanctuary, carried over the ridge by a freak thermal draft. It was the Patriarch. He was calling, and he wasn't calling to his family, he was calling to us. It was a warning. He knew we were there. The sound was faint, but to anyone who knew what to listen for, it was unmistakable. Geo froze. He grabbed the audio tech's shoulder. "Did you hear that?" he whispered. The tech shook his head. The jammer had masked it on the equipment, but Geo had heard it with his own ears. He stood up, staring at the ridge line I had been trying to keep him away from. "It came from the west," he said, his voice trembling with vindication. "You lied to me." He turned his flashlight on me, the beam blinding. "You've been leading us in circles. They are over there." I stood up, hands raised, the charade collapsing. "Don't go over there, Geo," I said, dropping the act. "It's not safe and it's not right." He laughed, a harsh, manic sound. "Safe? I have a tranquilizer rifle and a satellite phone. I'm going to make history." He started shouting orders to the team to pack up. They were going to night hike the ridge. They were going to breach the sanctuary under the cover of darkness. I had failed. My sabotage had only delayed the inevitable. I tried to physically block the path. "Listen to me," I shouted. "They aren't animals. They are a tribe. If you go in there with lights and guns, they will defend themselves." Geo pushed past me, his eyes wide with the gold fever of discovery. "Get out of my way, old man," he spat. "You had your chance. You blew it. Now it's my turn." The team filed past me, loaded with gear, heading straight for the pass that led to the bowl. I stood alone in the dying firelight, watching their headlamps bob up the switchbacks. I had a choice. I could hike back to the truck and leave them to their fate, or I could follow them and try to mitigate the disaster. I looked at the dark silhouette of the mountain. The Patriarch was up there, waiting. I grabbed my pack, leaving the heavy gear behind. I didn't take a weapon. I took a flare gun. I wasn't going to shoot the Sasquatch. I was going to signal the end of the world. He agreed. We met at a diner in Seattle a week later. He was young, intense, and armed with a laptop full of data that terrified me. He showed me heat maps, migration theories, and audio analysis that was disturbingly accurate. He wasn't a crackpot. He was a scientist. He looked at me with a mix of awe and suspicion. "Why did you fake the footage?" he asked. "Why hide the greatest discovery of all time?" I looked at his eager face and saw the same hunger I once had. "Because," I lied, "I wanted to monetize the documentary exclusive before anyone else got there." I felt the acid of the lie in my throat. I was painting myself as a greedy opportunist to hide my true motive. It worked. He bought it because cynicism is easier to believe than nobility. He agreed to let me lead the team, on the condition that I got a cut of the findings. We shook hands. I was now a double agent, hired to hunt the very creatures I had sworn to protect. I was going back into the woods, not as a witness, but as a saboteur. The preparation for the expedition was a surreal nightmare. I watched them pack tranquilizer rifles, just in case. I watched them load high-powered drones. Every piece of gear was a threat to the Patriarch. I packed my own bag, but instead of cameras, I packed devices to emit interference, white noise generators to confuse their audio recorders, and strong magnets to mess with their compasses. I was going to wage a silent war against my own team. As we drove toward the mountains, the guilt was crushing. I was bringing the enemy to the gates. I kept telling myself it was the only way, that if I didn't lead them, they would find the bowl on their own. But as the familiar peaks of the Cascades rose in the windshield, jagged and white against the blue sky, I wondered if I was strong enough to keep up the charade. I wondered if the Patriarch would sense my return. We parked at the trailhead, the same one I had fled 2 years ago. The air smelled of pine and rain, a scent that used to bring me peace, but now brought only anxiety. The team was high-fiving, checking their weapons, pumped for the hunt. I stood apart, looking up at the dark timber of the ridgeline. I whispered a silent apology to the wind. I'm coming back, I thought, but I'm bringing the storm with me. Stay hidden. For God's sake, stay hidden. We started the hike in. The researcher, Geo, was fast, fueled by the dopamine of discovery. He kept checking his GPS, questioning my route. My analysis said the ridge was to the west, he argued. The thermal bloom was there. I pointed to the east, toward a barren box canyon. The wind carries the heat, I lied smoothly. The den is over that ridge, trust me, I've seen them. He hesitated, looking at his screen, then looked at me. Okay, he said, lead the way. I took the first step off the trail, leading the invasion fleet away from the king, praying the deception would hold. I crested the ridgeline 20 minutes behind them, my lungs burning in the thin, cold air. Below me, the sanctuary bowl was bathed in the eerie green glow of their night vision illuminators. The team had set up a firing line on a rock outcropping overlooking the creek, the exact spot where the baptism had taken place. They looked like an invasion force, their laser sights cutting through the mist, their silence heavy with predatory intent. I saw Geo peering through a thermal scope, his body tense, his finger hovering near the trigger of the tranquilizer rifle. He wasn't observing, he was hunting. I scanned the dark timber on the far side of the creek. At first I saw nothing. Then a massive shadow detached itself from the darkness of the cedars. It was the Patriarch. He walked out into the open, stopping in the middle of the clearing. He didn't run, he didn't hide. He stood tall, expanding his chest, presenting himself as a target. He was drawing their fire, making himself the focal point to allow the matriarch and the juveniles to slip away into the ravine behind him. It was an act of supreme sacrifice. Target acquired, I heard Geo whisper, his voice carrying in the stillness. Range 100 yards. Windage is negligible. The rest of the team raised their cameras, ready to capture the money shot of the beast falling. The injustice of it hit me like a physical blow. This creature had lived in balance with this mountain for centuries, and now in seconds, he was going to be reduced to a biological sample on a government spreadsheet. I couldn't let the shutter click. I couldn't let the dart fly. I raised the flare gun. I didn't aim at the team, that's assault. And I didn't aim at the Patriarch. I aimed directly overhead, into the center of the bowl, right into the field of view of their sensitive night vision equipment. I pulled the trigger. The recoil was sharp, and with a thump, the magnesium canister arced high into the night sky. For a second, there was silence. Then the flare ignited. It was like a miniature sun going supernova. A blinding, searing white light exploded over the valley, turning night into an overexposed day. The effect on the team was instantaneous and devastating. Their night vision goggles, designed to amplify starlight thousands of times, were overwhelmed by millions of lumens. They ripped the headsets off, screaming, blinded by the sudden whiteout. The thermal sensors on the drones overloaded. The sensitive optics on the cameras flared and washed out. In that chaotic moment of blindness, I looked down at the clearing. The Patriarch was gone. He hadn't panicked. He had used the flashbang effect to vanish. The afterimage of his silhouette was burned into my retina, a towering figure stepping back into the void. The target had evaporated. The clearing was empty. The flare drifted down, hissing, casting long dancing shadows that looked like mocking ghosts. Geo spun around, blinking tears from his eyes, his face twisted in rage. "You!" he screamed, spotting me on the ridge. "You blinded us! You ruined the shot!" He raised the rifle, unsure where to aim. "I saved you!" I shouted back, my voice echoing off the canyon walls. And I saved him. "It's over, Geo. The film is ruined. The sensors are fried. Go home." He looked at the empty clearing, then at his useless, whitewashed monitors. He knew I was right. The data was garbage. The hike out was a funeral procession. The team was demoralized, their expensive gear packed away in sullen silence. Geo threatened to sue me, to have me arrested, to ruin my reputation in every scientific circle on Earth. I didn't care. I walked at the back of the line, listening to the wind in the trees. The forest felt lighter. The heavy, oppressive feeling of the hunt was gone. The sanctuary had been breached, yes, but the secret had held. I was blacklisted, of course. My photography career ended that night. The rumors spread that I was unstable, a saboteur, a crazy environmentalist who endangered researchers. I let the rumors fly. In fact, I encouraged them. The crazier I seemed, the less credible the coordinates became. I became the madman of the Cascades, a cautionary tale for any serious researcher thinking about exploring that sector. My disgrace was the final layer of camouflage for the family. I never went back to the bowl. I honored the boundary I had drawn with that flare. But sometimes, years later, I check the satellite imagery. The logging roads are still overgrown. The trail is still unmaintained. The ghost mountain lion is long gone, but the silence remains. I like to think that the juveniles, Split here and the others, are adults now, teaching their own children how to weave the cedar and how to walk without breaking a twig. The world moved on. New mysteries captured the public's imagination. But for me, the story never ended. It just went underground. I realize now that the most important photos are the ones we never take. The most profound discoveries are the ones we keep to ourselves. The patriarch is out there right now, breathing the cold air of the high alpine, watching the stars turn, safe in the knowledge that at least one human understood the assignment. So, when you look at the dark woods at the edge of the highway, don't be afraid. Be respectful. There are kings in those hills, and they are watching you with eyes that are older than your civilization, waiting for us to grow up enough to deserve a meeting. Until then, I keep the watch. I keep the silence. And I keep the memory of the fire that burned my career to the ground, and the shadow that walked away into the night, free.